Support for Amplified Voices comes from the Restorative Action Foundation. Learn more at restorativectionalliance.org.
Everyone has a voice, a story to tell. Some are marginalized and muted. What if there were a way to amplify those stories? To have conversations with real people in real communities? A way to help them step into the power of their lived experience? Welcome to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. Together, we can create positive change for everyone.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Amplified Voices. I'm your host, Jason, here with my co-host, Amber. Hello, Amber.
Good morning, Jason.
And today, Amber, we have a guest. Her name is C. Hello, C.
Hi there, y'all. How y'all doing?
Doing great. So we're going to ask you the same question that we've been asking all our guests, and that is, could you tell us a little bit about your life before you entered the criminal legal system and what brought you into it?
Wow. So my life before the criminal justice system was actually one that was really fraught with trauma and just a really trying life from a very young age. I watched my mother get murdered as a child, about age 6.
Oh, wow.
And,
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but I was raised in and around Maryland.
Okay. Well, 6. So what happened?
My mother was in a relationship and she was murdered by him in 1996. My mom was the type of woman that was kind of the black sheep of her family, and she was kind of just trying to forge her own path. Yeah, so when my mom died, I went into the foster care system and I spent pretty much the entirety of my youth in therapeutic environments or one type of institutional setting or a foster home. I've been into a bunch of them.
Were you an
And it was
only
just,
child?
I actually have a half sister, but we were not raised together. We don't actually have never met in person since we were very small children.
Wow. So 6 years old, your mother's murdered, which at 6 years old, you can't even process the permanent concept of death is challenging. And then you're in this foster system. That must have been horrible.
It was extremely terrible. It was really tough. I didn't have any type of sense of identity or connectivity. There was, most children grow up in homes that are able to provide, hopefully, structure, a sense of identity and continuity with what has come before and what you are going to contribute to, not just the legacy of your family, but what you're going to do with your life, in society. I never had any of that. There was always, my whole life was an experience of disconnection and dislocation. So like when I hear people talk about buzzwords like marginalization or disenfranchisement, I'm like, that's me. That's my picture.
Right. I'm so sorry that was sort of the beginning. And when you think about what that looked like for you in terms of a journey, did you find that there were little rays of light here and there with people that you encountered? Or tell us a little bit about what that looked like.
I guess that there was, but the really sad thing about my childhood is I was on and this is pretty common knowledge. Like the foster care system and those who are in clinical psychiatry and child psychiatry and whatnot, they tend to overdiagnose these children that often have traumatic backgrounds. So large swaths of my childhood and even my younger portion of adolescence are very opaque to me. They're really unrecollectable because I was so heavily medicated. They diagnosed me with all of this stuff when what I was I was a kid that had seen their mother be murdered, and I had experienced sexual abuse and physical abuse and things like that. So it wasn't that I had all of these developmental or psychological axes. It was that I needed a safe place to try to bounce back from
the trauma,
something that no child should ever have to go through.
Right.
Exactly. You were a normal child having normal reactions to very traumatic situations.
And you never had that safe place, is what you're saying.
No, I never have, not once in my life. The crazy thing about it is the amount of time that I have spent in institutional settings actually has drastically been greater than the amount of time that I've spent out of institutional settings. My life has truly, it's been shaped by one aspect of the system or another. I've never known that.
So, how do you get from 6 years old and then entering this foster system to, to where you are now? What comes next?
Ooh, okay, so I guess like from about that age until about 15 was a very unstable period for me. I jumped around a lot. I was in a lot of different homes. I went to a bunch of different schools. And one of the things that breaks my heart when I look back is I graduated from high school a year early, but it was a sympathy graduation. And I graduated with a 1.54 GPA, which means that I look back and I feel really terrible for the person that I was. And I feel really bad for kids that are in similar positions because I always loved school and I always loved learning. But I found myself struggling for any type of stability whatsoever. So at a very young age, I started kind of getting high and I found myself involved in the sex trade. At 14, I was running away and I was kind of surviving on my own. I just wanted to be away from these people. I wanted to get away from all of the sexual abuse and physical abuse that I had experienced between my childhood up until that point. And there was kind of a desire to autonomize my sexuality. I grew up with a very transactionally related life.
Hmm.
And I realized that there was going to be a kind of commerce or exchange for these things. I wanted to control them and I wanted them on my own terms. But I also
Yeah,
had
it's
this dream that you know, I would turn enough tricks to get money where I could go move somewhere and start over. Nobody would know me and I could have a clean start. So
and it's
yeah,
interesting you use the word control because I was thinking that as you were talking that you had no control over your environment or what you were living during those years. So for you to feel that you had some sort of control of what was happening to you and your own life and doing things on your terms must have been very valuable to you at that point.
it was. I really wanted to get away. I had this idea that I knew that I was never going to ever find like the perfect parents. I felt like it was too late. So in my mind, I had this fantasy that I would tell myself that I would get enough money that I would be able to move away and start over and I would meet this incredible guy and all my problems would be fixed. And he would, does that kind of story.
So you had a lot of dreams that everyone has. You were looking for a life that made you happy
Yeah,
and autonomy over your body, your surroundings. Like this is what like every human person wants. Would you agree
100%.
with that?
Yeah, 1000%. Absolutely. I wanted to feel like I was important and I wanted to feel like I had a place and I wanted to feel safe, most importantly. I think that anybody that knows me in my personal life will tell you that, like, my kind of catchphrase is when, like, I talk about my plans for the futures of the three S's: security, stability, safety. So
Did you ever get there?
I'm still working on it.
You're still on the
I'm
journey.
still working on
Okay.
it.
All right. So then what happens?
So at about 17 years old. I'm working at a job at Towson Mall in Towson, Maryland. I'm in this independent living program where you have to either work full time or work part time. You have to be doing something, go to school, work, whatever. So I meet these two girls, one from Louisville, Kentucky, one from Panama City Beach, Florida. And they tell me about this great job they have. They get to travel with the warm weather and they sell magazines and music and they get to meet people. And it sounds awesome to a 17-year-old that has really never been anywhere. And these young women are in many ways, what I want to be. So I, like a 17-year-old who's very impulsive, I go back to my little independent living program and I pack up a duffel bag and without knowing these people, I go jump in a big white van and I go on the road for several months. And during this whole time, it is a legitimate business and they are selling magazines and it is mostly like college age kids. But it's also like it's kind of like a sex trade on wheels, is what it is. Almost everybody is hooking up and posting Craigslist ads and using MySpace and Facebook. This is at that juncture where there's a transfer going on from old social media platforms to the newer ones. And I already was familiar with that. So I was like, come on, let's do it. But after a few months, it got found out that I wasn't 18. And so the person that owned that business, he was like, well, I can't keep you here because you're an underage runaway from your state. I told him my story. He's like, but I'll send you wherever you want. Because I told him, I was like, if I go back, they're going to end up hospitalizing me again, because that's what they would do when you would run away. They'd hospitalize you. So I had made a friend on the sales slash prostitution team who lived in Ellenwood, Georgia, and she had gotten fired. And she was like, if you ever find yourself wanting for a fresh start, you can come on down to Georgia with me. So that's what I ended up doing. I was literally on the Greyhound bus. I was like, hey, girl, how are you? Remember that time you told me I could come see you in Georgia? Well, I'm on the way. So I found myself down here, and it was culture shock. It was the first time I ever had experienced colorism, number one. But within a few months, I was kind of doing my own thing. And fast forward like a year later, I caught my first charges, and I got charged with pimping and pandering and sexual exploitation of a minor.
Wow. So I just sort of heard a couple of things that I wanted to ask some clarifying questions about. So you referred to experiencing color as number one. Can you explain for people who may not know what that means, what you mean by that?
Yeah, so colorism is the idea that inside of the Black community, there is kind of racism or discrimination from darker skinned people to lighter skinned people, or from lighter skinned people to darker skinned people. I'm Afro Latina, so in a lot of ways, I have really curly hair, because but in a lot of ways, I'm very, very light skinned. I'm what they call white passing sometimes. And I had never experienced colorism up north. I had never been teased for the way I talk. I'd never heard people tell me to stop talking white or stop trying to act sedity, is what they call it. I had never been told. I'd never experienced that before. And I believe I had read about it. I believe I'd heard about it, but I never realized it was a real phenomenon until I came down south. And it is definitely real.
Okay. And so you talk about you found yourself out of one situation and you traveled to go to another situation. And at this point, you're still 17 years old. Is that right?
Yeah. So when I left Maryland, I had just graduated a handful of months before. When I got down to Georgia, it would have been probably August or September. So I would have still been 17. I would have been almost 18.
Right. And so again, it sounds like what you were looking for were those S's that you talked about before. You're looking for
Yeah.
that stability. You've
Security
been
and
kicked
safety.
out of one thing that that you thought may have been sort of your path out. And then
Yeah.
you're finding yourself in an entirely new place, experiencing all sorts of different new phenomenon, one of which you just shared. And so that's where the criminal legal system then comes in. Tell us a little bit about what was that experience? You mentioned, being charged.
Yeah.
What was that like? So did you find yourself immediately incarcerated? Was there a period of, being out on bail or staying in on bail? Because it doesn't sound like you had a lot of support for somebody to come bail you out or anything like that. Let's walk through and
Right.
unpack that a little
And
bit.
as you're answering that, one thing that's hitting me is, you had all this trauma leading up to that. Did this just feel like one more traumatic event, or was it different at this point when you start getting charged for
Well, it
crimes?
was different, but it was definitely super traumatic. So I should preface and say that before the pimping and pandering charges occurred, there was a few months beforehand, there was another charge that occurred in DeKalb County, from where I and a person who I was providing sexual services to, they tried to take the money back from me, and I fought them, and we ended up fighting in the parking lot, and I had hit them with a pole. And I had actually gotten charged, and I told the police, I showed them text messages and everything. They actually tried to charge me with attempted armed robbery for trying to take my own money back from the guy who was trying to take it from me again. So that happened. I went to jail for that, and I did get bonded out eventually, but I sat for several months. And a friend of mine pulled a favor with their mom to get me bonded out. And so you fast forward like a year later, and I'm living at that time in Douglas County, Georgia. And the house that I live in is like the house of ultimate ill repute, which I actually believe is how my public defender at the time characterized it. But I lived not that far outside of Atlanta, and I was kind of getting well known in the Atlanta club scene because I was an entertainer. I would entertain at gay bars and I was at parties a lot. And I was just kind of building a name in that social and cultural demographic, really trying to. At that time I was trying to go mainstream, is what I called it. Like I was trying to transition into like a public figure of some sort. I was trying to monetize my presence in the community. So everybody that was kind of a part of my close inner circle, we were all just living our lives. A lot of us were disenfranchised or didn't have good family backgrounds, or maybe had parents that didn't accept us. And most of us were getting high, and a lot of us were having like sugar daddies or turning tricks to get by. So when they arrested me, I did not think that what I was doing was wrong. Like I understood that there were laws against it, but to me, it was more of kind of like how the law says malum prohibitum versus malum in se. Like this was something that somebody was trying to tell me was wrong, but it wasn't wrong for me to do these things if it was going to help me survive or get ahead. So in that context there, when I was arrested and I was sitting in this jail, and I realized that there was nobody that was going to be able to come along and save me because the news was making me out to be like I was Guido the killer pimp or something like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it was really extremely frightening. It was extremely embarrassing too. And it was heartbreaking because I knew that I wasn't the best person in the world, but I wasn't the type of person they were trying to make me be on the news. And like one thing about it is they're a business. So the more scandalous they can make it sound. So even though I was, by this time when these charges were going on the news, I was about 19. So instead of saying, that I was 19 and my victim was 17, they would say, oh, Atlanta drag queen pimps children. So
Right.
they knew how to make it more sensational than it was. And that was crushing. I felt very, I wanted to take my life, but honestly, it was terrible.
I'm really sorry to hear how those things are characterized. And one of the things that we highlight, and we've talked to a lot of different individuals on the podcast, is sort of the role that media plays in sensationalizing a lot of different things. So on one hand, there is accountability that happens, and individuals who have, done things that they're not proud of in their life are absolutely happy to take accountability for wrongdoing that they've done, but there's no nuance in the conversations, right? Exactly as you said, it's that whole idea of, how many clicks can we get? How salacious can we make the story? So, while the story could have or should have been a young person trying to survive after a lifetime of trauma, it's drag queen is pimping children. And sort of this idea that, at
Right.
19, you're like fully formed, your impulsivity is gone, all of those things. That's another conversation that, we really need to be having in our country about like
Right.
what we mean when we're talking about criminalization and identities and all of that. So I really appreciate you sharing all of that.
At any
with
point
us.
when you were in the whole foster care system, did anybody say to you, how do we help you? How do we help you heal from, watching your mother being murdered, from all that you've been through? Did anybody just say, hey, come over here, we just need to give you a hug and give you some warmth and comfort? Did that ever happen for you?
At one point, I did have one or two decent social workers, so I don't want to demonize them, but it's important to understand that when we are answering questions like you just asked me, so you have to understand that these people are a part of a bureaucracy and they work inside of that system, and the larger system itself is worth being vilified, even if that person isn't. Overall, though, my experience as a youth that was in the foster care system was that this was pretty much your lot. Whenever I exhibited what I guess you would call delinquent or just poor behavior as a youth, I was given more medication or I was moved to different facilities that were like disciplinary facilities. That is not the approach. And the way the system is set up now, as law professor and advocate Dr. Daniel Hatcher from University of Baltimore Law School can tell you, the system is set up to be predatory on children. They're more concerned with providing the lowest provision of care they can and then applying for Title 4D and for Title 4E funds from you. I found out later on that my survivor's benefits from my mother's death were subsumed by the state.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say all of this to say that I feel like the state took many, many things from me and in return provided me almost nothing.
And the goal was basically to break you and to make you just, just to conform to societal norms without giving you any safety net or any of the tools that would help you get there. So
yeah. And when I started talking about being a woman, that is when they started medicating me more.
So how old were you when that started?
I started the idea without the knowledge of the terms and the scientific part of the phenomena began to coalesce around 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
But I became I advocated very strenuously on my own behalf by the time I was like 13 or 14, which seems to be on point for most teenagers.
Sure.
With anything.
Right.
that's when we get complicated.
Yes. What year was it the first time you were incarcerated?
In the county jail, it would have been when I had that first charge for what would become the attempted armed robbery. That would have been like 2008 because so it would have been like 2008 because the charges. So I was arrested in 2010 for my pimping and pandering charges. So that means I would have been, I'm sorry, no, my crime commit date is 2010. So I would have been 19 years old, but they didn't take me into custody until like March of the next year. So I would have been 20 years old when I went into custody.
Right. And so I heard you say something that I think is really, really important. And that was the idea of villainizing systems, while there are people who are working within systems who really honestly feel that they are making a difference and doing the right thing. Because I think we see that in a lot of different systems. We see that in the criminal legal system. We see that in the child welfare system. And then the other thing that really sort of triggered for me when you were talking was this idea of so many transitions. So how can you be provided care, right? Any sort of sustained and effective care when you're encountering so many transitions? And my experience, I started my career working with abused and neglected children in a nonprofit. And what I saw was these transitions are so detrimental. And not only that, like things don't go with you, right? Like you say that you have access to records and this and that, but it's so fragmented that the only advocate that you have is yourself because you have all the information. Does that feel right?
Absolutely, 1000%. And what I would add to that is actually the system is so pernicious and they're so determined to cover up any wrongdoing on their part that so during my criminal prosecution process, my public defender was able to get some records from my state foster care system to show that I was an abused child, that my mother did, and that I was involved in prostitution from a young age. She got some of those records, but they didn't answer most of her records requests, despite the fact they were my records. Years later, when I was incarcerated, I would actually request and I would offer to tender the money for production and shipping for my own records. And I got a letter back from their attorney, which I wrote him an angry letter in response, like, well, hold on, when I was a child, you were supposed to be my attorney. You're supposed to be protecting my interests. But I actually got a letter from their attorney saying that I would have to go seek a court order for my own records. And since then, I've spoken to another attorney who said that was not the correct route. They make it very difficult for you to be able to hold them responsible, and they make it very difficult for you to be able to just look back, like from where I am now, the type of perspective and kind of emotional and intellectual heights that I've gained since my childhood. I am ready to, and I want to be able to examine my past and to have things laid bare, because I need to have some type of connectivity, and a large portion of my childhood was stolen from me. So
is it fair to say that when you were 19 years old and engaging in sex work and you were with a 17-year-old, that you yourself were not operating at an adult level?
Oh, 1000%. And that's something that I told the judge. It's like, even though, and now I say that I was wrong because she was 17, but at that time, even if I would have known that she was 17, which I did not, even if I would have, I wouldn't have thought that what I was doing was because look what I was doing from 13, 14 years old. To
Right.
me, we were two people that had similar stories where we're trans, because we were both trans girls. She had a not understanding, very conservative and abusive mother. She came from kind of a not low economic, but low middle economic kind of situation. And we just had a lot in common. So to me, this was somebody that we had common themes running through our stories, and we were sisters in kind of this enterprise, and we were getting high out of our mind and having a good time too, you know. So
Right.
yeah, no, I definitely was a child, and I wish that the system I wish that the system had the honesty and the desire to actually treat problems rather than symptoms, because then maybe instead of getting a 30-year sentence, maybe I would have gotten, something more reasonable.
And
Yeah.
also had the tools to be in a different place and space and all of that in the first place, right?
Yeah, 1000. Yes,
Yeah. So, I
100%.
mean, yeah, the system created you the way you are and then took no responsibility. And instead of saying, hey, things went really off the rails here, we need to help you. We need to help you live a healthy life and be who you are and help you realize who you are and all of that. They just say, nope, we're going to lock you up. We have to put you away because, and then they start with all the names, like you said in the media, and they're calling you a predator and they're calling you a groomer now. And they're all those types of things when you're a person who's living your life the way you know how and just trying to survive. I mean, it's not even like I'm trying to get ahead. You're just trying to survive.
I would stress that that's actually like 1000% correct, because the reality is, and that's why I wanted to come on this podcast with you and Amber so badly, is because when I pay attention to the political rhetoric that's going on right now, I really see strands that run back. Like it seems like this kind of anti-trans slash groomer sentiment has popped up only within the past few years. But I really, and I know that's a little bit egocentric kind of, but I really see strands running back even to the time period of my prosecution, because, I didn't have a press secretary and the media was at my plea hearing. I've never seen a public defender put together a PowerPoint presentation to defend a client at a plea hearing. I've never seen that. So my public defender, she really did fight for me. And they weren't interested in the fact that this was kind of, in many ways, a co-victimhood, in the sense that we were both
Right.
victims of our circumstances and our past and just the desperation of the moment, So I really see that there is a desire to vilify and to villainize people who are gender nonconforming or who are queer or who are of a certain racial background, etc. And I can't help but to feel like my case was handled the way it was handled because I was trans and because this other person who was a little bit younger than me was being trans, because they even tried to say in the case that I helped this person to be
Right.
trans, but you can't help somebody to feel. I've never helped a guy who's not interested in trans women to like it. Like you can't make somebody be something they're not. I don't believe that.
Right. Right. And so when you were incarcerated, you were in a men's facility?
Yes, I was incarcerated with men, and when I first got locked up, it was it was really bad, because if you were extremely feminine looking, if you looked very passable, which I hate that phrase because it sounds like gatekeepery, but they would actually segregate you. You'd be on 24/7 lockdown, which we now know is, of course, akin to torture. So we fought to be able to integrate into the population, but that has, of course, presented its own problems because the
Sure.
prison system lacks both the integrity and the infrastructure to actually make sure that they keep other other incarcerated people safe. So when you have this particularly vulnerable segment, it's not good.
Right. So where did you feel the least safe from other folks who were incarcerated, or from the officers and the system itself? I mean, or it was just everywhere?
I would say it was everywhere. It's like having various different threats presented to you. They're still a threat. They're still not great.
Right.
It's just they're coming from different sources. But overall, if you asked me to choose who I was treated the worst by, staff or prisoners, it would be a terrible toss up. Like, I'm not sure who would win that. Over time, though, I kind of managed to win over a lot of my fellow prisoners. In my state, I built up a really good name because I had won litigation, and I was able to help some people with cases and stuff like that. So that kind of bought me some,
Wow.
what do you call it, street cred in the
Right.
system. But yeah.
So I wanna sort of unpack a couple of things. So do you feel like you had really talked about sort of this idea of people are just sort of more realizing, or it's more prevalent, this language around grooming and, the trans population and the LGBTQ population, but that you saw that in your own case? Do you think that there is more brazenness around that in the current times? Again, people who have been following this for a while and living this, this is their life, obviously have, seen this since the beginning of time, right? Like
Yeah.
but it does seem that in the political sphere, right, that if somebody disagrees with somebody, they start utilizing that sort of language to weaponize against an opponent, really, even if the situation has nothing to do with gender identity.
I completely agree. So yeah, I see it all the way back to cases like my own, and other cases of trans people who I've followed, which I'd like to point out that the number of people charged or convicted who are trans with charges like my own is
Mm-hmm.
statistically insubstantial. But I followed the cases of biological women who had similar backgrounds to mine, such as Tiffany Simpson from Georgia and Lizette DeLuna from Texas. These women had backgrounds as sex workers from very young ages, most of the time held in that field against their will, which at one point I went through with my case. The person who was charged as my co-defendant would actually beat the shit out of us if we didn't keep doing what we were supposed to
Mm-hmm.
do. So I follow their cases, and I can't help but to see some very stark, striking similarities. And then I noticed that even the unfavorable press coverage was nowhere near as scathing and
Sure.
as capricious as what was in my case. And I cannot help but to feel that there is both a positive and a negative aspect to that. It's a positive aspect because it's like there's this idea that trans people are inherently bad and morally egregious, and therefore, if they do this thing, it's monstrous. Whereas women do it, then it was just something that they were doing because of circumstances. But then it's also kind of a backhanded compliment because it's the idea that it's permissible for women because it's women. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of people that are conservative men. They feel like trans women have surrendered something precious by giving up their kind of male dominion in the patriarchy. So it's kind of an insult in a way as well there. So there's a lot of components to the kind of collective or societal psychology that I am not qualified
Right.
to address at all. What I will say is this is like it's very evident. And the quickest way to find out, I always say the quickest way to find out what somebody's politics are is just to kind of throw out a little bait out there about the trans issue, because I guarantee you very quickly, if they're conservative, something to do with they love to put the children in front, which is so
Right.
crazy because I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the conviction rates and I'm looking at the data, and I'm like, all of these right-wing conservative, I'm scratching my head, all these right-wing conservative types are getting these grossly disproportionate conviction rates over here for the same thing that they're accusing these people over here, just because these people, all they want to do is they want children to grow up in a world where they understand that there are different types of people and it's okay to treat everybody okay, you know?
Right.
So I that kind of blows my mind a little bit. And if I didn't know any better, I would think that the conservative side had a monopoly and they just didn't want, they're worried about it being shaken up. I think that it's really crazy that we live in a world that our first go-to is to call people groomers or to say that, you know, everything they're doing is just to attack. I would never ever harm a child. That doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that these people, they want to, the first thing they're going to say is that it's about the children, it's about the children, it's about the children. But it's not about that. They're using what they know is kind of a rallying point
Yes.
to fearmonger people into thinking that these people who just want to exist, they want to have protections, they want to, and in my heart, like, yes, I would like to let kids be kids. Like, maybe in an ideal world, kids could learn about that in high school or in college. But the problem is you have these people who they will indoctrinate their kids. So when their kids grow up, their kids are not decent people. They're raging bastards. So at that point, it's too late to give them a high school or a college course that says, hey, you can treat all people okay. Like, you don't have to like them, you don't have to agree with them, but you should have some type of,
And,
emotional reciprocity of
There should be
respect.
space for everyone.
and you don't,
Absolutely.
yeah, you don't have to understand it. If somebody tells you this is who I am, that's enough,
That's it.
right? You
That's
don't have
true.
to understand it.
So I wanna explore, you mentioned sort of a disproportionate sentencing. Let's talk a little bit about, what that process looked like, sort of the components that were used in sentencing, because you're exactly right. What we see in, the criminal legal system, that gender identity and gender nonconforming people are disproportionately seen as dangerous or bad and sentenced accordingly. So can you speak a little bit about that a little bit
Yeah,
more?
I call it policy sentencing. And so I've written about this and I've talked about it before on other platforms. Policy sentencing is when a judge and a prosecutor, these people have political views that when they sentence this person who's gender nonconforming or queer, trans, what have you, they're sentencing them to the extreme possible, and they're trying to stack up related charges that allow them to run consecutive sentences or multiple long sentences together. The reason why is they're not just punishing that trans or queer or gay person for the current criminal conduct that they're before that court for. They're also trying to remove the likelihood of that person returning to the political into to the social realm. And so I call it policy sentencing because the whole point is to remove people like this for as long as possible from engagement and interaction with society at large. When you do that, you essentially, from the mind of these people, dispose of a problem. Hopefully they die off, but more importantly, their politics and their sentiment and their visibility is decreased.
Wow. I mean, like that really gives a lot to think about. And I don't know that I've ever heard it sort of like characterized in that way. And
You felt that, didn't you,
I
Amber?
really like, I felt that to my core, because I think that
Absolutely.
we see it all the time as it
Well, it's been happening to
relates
Black
to
people.
exactly, as it relates to
Right.
race, as it relates to outspoken disability advocates, as it
Mhm.
relates to all sorts of people who are, saying, I'm here, I have the right to exist just like you, and I should be treated in an equitable manner. So I really appreciate you explaining that, and I would love to have access to something that you've written that we could sort of throw in the podcast notes if it's out there, because I would love to have our viewer or our
Yeah.
listeners have
And that
access
Yeah.
to it as well.
and it brings up some questions for me. Like, you went from being, as you described, not a great student, right? And not doing well in school, and to someone who is writing and has some education now. Tell us
Yeah,
a
I
little
just
bit.
graduated with my doctorate.
Yeah.
Wow, like
Tell us,
exciting.
yeah. So tell us how you go from that to, with all the obstacles that are thrown at you, how do you end up being a doctor?
Whew. So for religious people, God, definitely. But for non-religious people, just getting tired of my own excuses and having really incredible friends and networking with people that believed in me and believed in my vision that I have for what I want to do with the rest of my life and what I want to contribute to this world. But I haven't achieved the three S's yet for myself in their final form, to use a Dragon Ball Z phrase there. But yeah, but prison has actually presented me, scarily enough, the most stability that I've ever had over the last few years, because I've been pretty much stuck in the same places for long term. But so yeah, when I was younger, I was bouncing around a lot and I didn't have any type of really good support system. And I was hurting and I was just being a troublesome kid. So now for like the last 8 years, I've been able to kind of sit still for the most part. I've transferred, I did some facility transfers or whatever. But while I was incarcerated, I was able to get a large bulk of my academic work done. And I had friends like Castalia Madrano, who's the deputy editor of Filter Magazine, Seshi Blanchard, who is a well-known harm reduction, drug policy journalist, Lyra Foster, who is an incredible transgender rights advocate and attorney out of Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Benjamin Boyce from Colorado, who is a communications PhD and educator. These people, they became my tribe and they helped me. They really they invested in me. So I got my double bachelor's from Jacksonville Baptist Theological Seminary in historical and theological studies. And then I got a master's from Amherst Theological Seminary in theological and historical studies. And I just graduated with my doctorate from them in theological and historical studies. And because I'm an overachiever, I went back to Blackstone Career Institute and got certified as a paralegal.
All right,
Love all of
so we need to stop for a second.
I
We
can't
need
even
to
keep up with it.
right.
It's like so amazing.
We need to stop. We need to absorb what you just told us. We need people who are listening to absorb what you just said, remembering the earlier part of this conversation where you came from to where you are right now.
Mhm.
I can't believe it. I have imposter syndrome. I can't believe it.
It is remarkable. It is outstanding. And if nobody has said they're proud of you, we're saying it right now. And anybody
100%.
who's listening to you says, we are so happy for you to be
Thank
at
you very
that
much.
point in your life. And you should be so proud of yourself for what you've done and celebrate and take it in.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
I have to say, see, I was something you just said, like, just so, you're going over like these people that came alongside you. I'm sorry, I'm tearing up myself. What
I am.
Look at me. What I heard you just say is these people invested in me.
Yeah, like nobody ever had in my whole life. And I got them one after one. They came into my life within like a 8-year window. And they've been my tribe. I'm grateful for them.
And so what I want our listeners to really think about and understand is when you take the time to invest in someone else and see someone, right? That matters. That makes all the difference. So if nobody learns anything from listening to you and your amazing story and seeing you for the amazing person that you are, if they can take that nugget away, that will be something. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
I really appreciate y'all.
I mean, I'm really excited to hear, because it seems like you're doing like a lot of really amazing work. You're doing some writing. You've clearly done a lot as far as education is concerned. When you think about mentoring and mentors you've had, talk a little bit about like what that looks like. And because we know that like mentors are important.
Yeah. So I think what you just said a moment ago is like 100% spot on. What a mentor essentially is somebody that sees, even if you can't see it, they see past all the murk, they see the potential, they see that faint glimmer of what is most assuredly is gold. So for me, that has been invaluable. I've had people that have really put their time and their energy into me and have coached me to stop being self-destructive and stop being self-sabotaging, but also to, and my friend, she always gets on to me right now about it because, like I said a minute ago, I have imposter syndrome, but to really just realize that you get to ultimately decide the rules of engagement for your life. You know, that's not to say that there are not handicaps or limitations or parameters that you cannot go beyond, but you ultimately do get to set the parameters, you know, for the rules of engagement for your life. Mentoring for me has looked like people that were willing to listen to the kind of emotional situation of what I was going through with coming into prison and being in prison and the challenges that were present, not just being an incarcerated person, but being an incarcerated person who, for all intents and purposes, sticks out like a neon thumb in a men's facility. So that was a big part of it, having reliable people that I could emotionally deposit in. And while, you know, ideally a relationship should be equilibrious, I will say that like my friends, my mentors have been incredible people because I'm not able to return to them the same accessibility to deposit their stresses and their heartaches and their worries and their human incidences into me. And I fully plan to make up for all of that. Everybody knows that they have free hugs forever, you know, but it'll make me cry. But yeah, so yeah.
I just want to ask you, since you mentioned sort of the struggles of incarceration in a space that is not necessarily created or has the infrastructure for you. Can you, if, and it's okay if you don't want to talk about it, can you talk a little bit about accessing healthcare within a system?
Yeah. So generally speaking, healthcare is abysmal. But so I actually started a lawsuit in 2013 that I settled June 2nd, 2015. I was the first person who was incarcerated in Georgia who was trans to win a legal litigation battle against the Georgia Department of Corrections to get access to female replacement hormone therapy. A year later, the very well known Ashley Diamond, who is a civil rights advocate and transgender advocate, she would blow up and get a lot of attention for that, which I'm not mad about. Kudos for her. She did great work and I appreciate it. But I was always a little hurt that nobody ever acknowledged that in the open letter that they sent to the GDC, it listed my case. My case was the legal precedents that allowed them to go fight the next step of the battles. But we've collectively, about four of us, we spent years litigating, and there are still a few people who are in the system, and that is a very difficult place to be in, but they are advancing the next stages of essentially fighting policies that are commensurate to the anti-trans policies out in the free, non-incarcerated world. And that's very important to understand, is that prison is a microcosm, kind of a reflection in a way of the outside world. It has its own economy, it has its own rules of etiquette, it has its own pecking system, and of course it has its own social justice issues. And so when we were talking earlier in the larger framework of anti-trans rhetoric, that exists definitely inside of this nation's prison system. So in Georgia, there is still an ongoing battle to advance access to medical care for trans people. But overall, I wish that more prisoners would collectivize to try to bring a bigger suit, because the entire medical system needs to be revamped. The provision of care needs to be revamped. I recently found this out in one of my journalistic investigations. Last year, the governor gave the contract for GDC medical care to a private company called WellPath that had to change its name from Correct Care Solutions because it has such a bad reputation of inmates dying in its care. But while I cannot prove that they were a donor to the governor's campaign, we do think that it's odd that they won out of other companies that have cleaner records and who have actually done more business in the state of Georgia. But what's really interesting is they actually got to kick out a provision of the care they had to provide. They just completely rejected it. They said, no, we're not paying for HIV care. So the thousands of prisoners who are incarcerated in Georgia who need access to literally life-maintaining HIV care, At any given time, the state could essentially say that they don't have to pay for it because they have a medical contractor, but the medical contractor has been permitted to say that they won't provide coverage for it. So
Wow.
it's messed up.
Right. So I do want to just call attention to, first of all, thank you for being willing, because there's a huge risk to being like a plaintiff in a suit, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
so I just want to like name
Understatement.
that.
Yeah.
Like that's a bit of an understatement. So
Right.
the courage that it took to say, no, this is not acceptable and I'm going to, be part of changing it is amazing. I want to mention, because we are in Connecticut, we actually have a situation here in our state where there is a pending case with the ACLU of Connecticut, who is fighting for a client to receive gender affirming care within DOC. It's been going on for such a long time. And what is so astounding is we have elected officials in our state, including our attorney general, who is very pro LGBTQ, goes to events and rallies and speaks on the issues and all of this, yet is fiercely and still defending, based on very anti-trans arguments, denying this person care within the DOC. So your comments around it's sort of like prison being a microcosm. One of the things when we talk about these cases is people try to make them cases about trans rights, which they are. But these are human rights. These are human rights. People try to make it about it's a prison case. It's not a prison case. It's not a trans rights case. It's a human rights case. It doesn't matter whether you're in the community, whether you're, behind the walls. People should have access to healthcare. And so Thank you for really explaining and walking us through that.
You're welcome. I think that it was the case of Turner versus Safely. The Supreme Court said that prison bars do not keep prisoners from the protections of the Constitution. And what we need to remember when we're talking about those who are incarcerated is that and the reality is it can happen to anybody. It can happen to our loved ones. It can happen to ourselves. The reality is what we're willing to allow to happen to another person is what we're ultimately saying we're willing to allow to happen to ourselves if our circumstances were different. And the policies that we stand by or we acquiesce to by our failure to object, those actually say a lot more about who we are as an individual, as a culture, and as a nation than anything else does. You may think that you define yourself or sum yourself up by what you wear, what you drive, or who you voted for, or that you recycle. Those things matter. They are components. But in reality, the structures that we shape, the policies that we stand by that dictate the societal structure, that speaks volumes. And so when it comes to the prison issues, those are particularly important because it reflects upon the people that, if anything, most need us to be they need us to be our most merciful, most compassionate, and most reasonable selves. The fact that they may or may not have committed a wrong in the past should not remove them from the realm of human rights and the access to important things like medical care.
I wish people could see me because I'm like raising the roof, like, I don't know, snapping, raising the roof. Like I like, like whatever you call it, every emoji there is, I'm throwing it out there.
I just picture Amber. I just picture somebody right now, like on their treadmill, listening to the podcast. It's like we've covered everything so far, from race to early trauma to incarceration to turning things around and getting an education to healthcare in the prisons, to oh my God, your story, is more modern culture all wrapped in one, right? So I mean, it touches on every major issue. Amber, what were you going to say?
So I think that, we are coming sort of to the end of our conversation, and we want to make sure that if there is some component of your story that you feel is like super important and we haven't covered yet, that you feel is like really important to sort of get out into the world, want to just give you an opportunity to have some space to say more.
I know we kind of talked on it a little bit, but I have never really had a chance to really address it, and some of the stories that I've published sharing my experiences, they always say don't read the comments, but I can't help it. I read the
Right.
comments. And I've noticed that, and of course there's some minds you can never change, but I told myself that every opportunity I get, I would kind of drive this home. And it's that whenever we hear a new fact or we hear a new argument, we're always willing, even if it resonates with us, we always create this little smidgen of doubt. We always leave this little room for doubt so that we can be hopefully corrected or that we can modify our view to be the most accurate. And I would say that when it comes to the stories of people who have backgrounds like mine or similar backgrounds, or maybe have a sex conviction or any type of conviction, I would encourage people to create a little doubt to realize that what was reported to you or what you heard or your predispositions may not be giving the most accurate or most fair kind of accounting of the situation. Because one of the things that I find myself raging against every day, and it sucks because I know I can't really change it, is the reality that there is going to always be some people that feel like I'm a predator or that I, did this terrible thing. And I can't do anything about that. But I do wish that maybe over time with my story and with, just encouraging people to think, stop seeing people as so one dimensional, that they're just this one moment, this one transaction, because there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to it. And we really need to give people grace to come back from their worst moments as a human being. Okay.
Absolutely.
For sure.
I love that. And I think that you are highlighting once again sort of this idea of the polarization and the exceptionalism and the salaciousness with which media, and not just media, there are, policymakers and media and people who have platforms and power assign this exceptionalism to anything having to do with sexual offenses, violent offenses, certain types of people. And it's our responsibility when we're talking about being responsible members of society, right? To create those questions in our head to see the humanity.
One thing I thought that was interesting, a little bit different, is that when you showed up on Twitter, you went from like 0 followers to thousands, like overnight. I mean, I don't know exactly what happened, but it seems like you touched a nerve. I mean, what are your thoughts on Twitter at this moment?
First of all, I would like to say that I love Twitter. I think I have a problem. Like, I need an intervention.
You're my spirit animal.
Mine too.
Me too.
I have a problem, but Elon Musk, the sooner he gets out the picture, I feel like my marriage with Twitter can get over its rocky parts, But I recently told my friend, I was like, I don't even need a man. I have Twitter. But so, yeah. So I think that what it is I do have a very unique story. And I think that it allows a lot of people who have been on the fence or maybe who are just of a mindset that can be persuadable. It allows me to kind of wedge in and create space for them to mentally operate differently. Like, see, not in, first of all, I don't want to say that any sex offender is bad, period. But I do try to get them to see like there are shades to people's stories. And I think that the way that I have covered the experiences of people who are incarcerated and I've provided, amplified narratives to go on amplified voices about these people's experiences. And I'm just trying to get them to understand that if you want to hold the government responsible in this area, then why not in this area? I think that all of those things kind of, but it's also, I think that my content on Twitter is like you get a little bit of comedy. Like I had one tweet that went viral about like, shout out to all the straight guys who follow me because they think I'm kind of hot. And then they realize I'm trans. I post little funny stuff like that. And that gets me followers. One day I might post theology and history. And then the next day I'll post something about sex workers' rights and criminal justice. So I think it's a little bit of everything. But also, I think that I really make the effort to connect with my followers. I don't see them as my followers, I see them as my community. We're co-educating each other about issues that potentially have, I hope, the capacity and power to be changed and therefore make a more fair, more just, more community-centered society. And that's ultimately what my work is about. Every component about it is really just about getting people to see that what happens to another person, it does have relation to us. It all relates back. So I would like to think that all of those things have kind of contributed to it, but I couldn't give you an exact recipe. I don't know.
love all of that. So I think that we're coming down to the end of the podcast. So Jason, if you have anything to say before I ask my famous last question.
Go ahead, ask your last question, then I'll have a couple comments at the end of.
Okay.
All right.
So see, I always ask this question at the end of the podcast because part of what we're doing here is creating space for people to tell their stories and also providing content to people who may find themselves in similar situations. Because what we know and what we have felt in our own journeys is you can feel very isolated and alone. So if you had the opportunity to give one piece of advice to someone who was following a similar journey or in a similar situation as yours, what would that be?
That's tough. I guess the one piece would be, don't wait for your circumstances to get better. Don't wait for life to get good. Right now, it's as good as it's going to be in this moment. It's the only moment you have. Maximize it. Make it count no matter where you are. Find ways to grow beyond the pains of your circumstances. Find ways to thrive because nobody is going to give you the high road. You have to build it yourself.
That's amazing. I love that so much. Jason, last thoughts?
So just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And we finally got to speak. We've been trying to set this up for a while. And just once again, to say your story from where you've come from to where you've gone is just beyond remarkable. I hope that things just get better and better from here on out, because I think you deserve good things in your life. So
thank you so much.
So
thank you so much. Thank both of you very much for what you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, C. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast today, and we really look forward to opportunities to reconnect and maybe collaborate on some things, because I know that the only way there is for all of us at this point is up, right?
I love it. Let's do it.
All right, until next time.
You've been
Amber.
listening to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. For more information, episodes, and podcast notes, visit amplifiedvoices.show.